I talked to Tucker yesterday about this. He had just gotten back from Phoenix, and he told me that for the very first time in his life, he genuinely fears for the future of the country. And I said, I have to agree. I've never experienced this kind of hatred amongst Americans before. I mean, we have political problems and issues and demonstrations, and think of the summer of '68 and the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. But I've never genuinely feared for the country like
Me
I
neither.
do today.
Former CIA officer John Kiriakou breaks down the seismic shifts shaking global politics. In this candid conversation, he exposes the deep rot of political corruption at home, the unraveling of institutional checks and balances, and the diplomatic earthquake as the world moves to recognize Palestine. Kiriakou's insider perspective raises urgent questions about power, accountability, and America's place in a rapidly changing world.
Because like you, I was reminded immediately of Abscam. Now, for those of our viewers who don't remember Abscam, this took place in 1981, where FBI agents dressed up like Arab sheikhs and bribed a U.S. senator and several members of the House of Representatives. Of course, it was a sting operation. Some of them went to prison. All of them ended up being heaved out of Congress. But the message was that bribery is wrong, 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 and you should not do it. So now here we have Tom Holman, who's the head of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And he's taking a sack full of money as a bribe. It's caught on camera because it's a sting operation. And President Trump said, oh, he didn't do anything wrong. Leave him alone. They're not asking that he resign. And in fact, the president said today, his job is perfectly safe and he will not permit the Justice Department to file charges. We're in the twilight zone, Ted. There was another thing that's similar, that's parallel. Donald Trump has been saying for weeks, months, that he wants to prosecute Letitia James and everybody else who ever did him wrong. Well, last week, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, which is the espionage court, resigned under pressure from Trump. Trump now today named a loyal Justice Department official to be the new U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, and he has ordered her to prosecute Letitia James in EDVA. She can't. Letitia James is not accused of having committed a crime in the Eastern District of Virginia. There is no connection to the venue. They can't do it. But Trump said on Truth Social last night that he has ordered the Justice Department to begin going after, arresting, and prosecuting his political enemies. He came right out and said it on Truth Social. And so we're in uncharted waters right now. We don't know where this is going to go, if anywhere. And Congress hasn't said anything. Nobody has the guts in Congress to say anything. And then today, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump is allowed to fire the last remaining Democrat on the Federal Trade Commission. So all that does is it gives the Republicans a very temporary win, and it's a little incremental win. But what the Supreme Court has done is they've essentially said, when the Democrats win the White House, which they will, they can fire all the Republicans and put yes men in all of their positions. So nice country our leaders are giving us these days. And if you're going to take a bribe, just like we always used to say at the CIA, if you're going to steal, don't steal $20. Steal
Right.
$1 million. If you're going to take a bribe and you're going to risk not just your career and your reputation, but your freedom, don't take 50,000 measly dollars.
Totally.
Millions of dollars. I'm afraid he is. If you don't have a president who's going to put his foot down and demand that you resign, if you have an attorney general who will refuse to prosecute you or refuse to allow you to be prosecuted, then yeah, you've got no problems. But then at the same time, see how many pegs we fall on the United Nations corruption list for next year. I think that's exactly right. I can't disagree with anything you said. I looked at a map in the Washington Post today of countries around the world that recognize Palestine and countries that don't. And, we talk about it here in the United States like it's this really big, momentous decision that's going to change the course of humankind. No, the countries that don't recognize Palestine are the United States, Norway, Sweden, Greece, Germany, and Austria. And that's pretty much it. The rest of the world has always recognized Palestine, or has for years. So no, we make it sound like it's this momentous, cataclysmic decision. No, it's not at all. I just cannot believe that any of that is true. We saw the video. We all saw the video. It did catastrophic damage to the man's neck. It didn't hit a bone. I talked to Tucker yesterday about this. He had just gotten back from Phoenix, and he told me that for the very first time in his life, he genuinely fears for the future of the country. And I said, I have to agree. I've never experienced this kind of hatred amongst Americans before. I mean, we have political
stupidity.
Yeah, we have political problems and issues and demonstrations, and think of the summer of '68 and the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. But I've never genuinely feared for the country like
Me
I
neither.
do today.
As the discussion unfolds, Kiriakou connects the dots between domestic scandals and international upheaval. He reveals how unchecked corruption at the highest levels is eroding public trust, while the U.S. finds itself increasingly isolated on the world stage. With more countries recognizing Palestine and American public opinion shifting, Kiriakou explains why these changes are more than symbolic. They signal a new era in global power dynamics.
So Barack Obama said during the 2008 campaign that he was going to order an investigation into the Dashti Leili massacre. What happened was, on November 30th and December 1st, 2001, 2,000 Taliban soldiers en masse gave up to the Northern Alliance. That's right, Mazar-e-Sharif. So they asked the CIA, what do we do with these Taliban? The CIA said, truck them out to the desert, hold them in the desert until we can divide them up and send them to smaller jails around the country, because there was no jail in Afghanistan that early on in the war that could hold 2,000 people. As you said, this was Abdurrashid Dostum, one of the most vile, one of the darkest and most murderous men in modern Afghan history. He said to me once, he said, "You don't like me very much, do you?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't. I think you're a cold-blooded murderer." So, they trucked all these Taliban out to the desert.
No water.
One of the 14 survivors out of the 2,000 said that when they opened the trucks, the bodies fell out like sardines from a can because there were no air holes, there was no water,
They were
there was
screaming.
no food. They all suffocated. I went up there in 2009, and you go to the site of where the trucks were opened up, and there are human bones just all over the place, and clothing just sticking out of the ground. It's grisly. So I told John Kerry, I'm going to fly out to Mazar-e-Sharif, and I want to get to the bottom of this. I know Abdurrashid Dostum did this, and I believe that the CIA, if it wasn't directly involved, the CIA watched it unfold. They did nothing to stop it. So I went out there and I came back and I told Kerry, there are human bones sticking out of the ground, and they didn't even bother to bury the bodies. They just left them there in the desert. So I wrote a letter under Kerry's auto pen signature to the CIA, and I said, we have this witness that came forward, and I said, was the CIA at the site of where the trucks were opened? So 6 weeks later, a colleague of mine came into my office and said, very casually, he said, "Hey, the agency sent you a response to your letter." And I said, "I didn't see any response from the agency. I just checked my mail an hour ago." And he said, "Well, they classified it top secret. And at the time, I only had a secret clearance." And I said, "Well, what did it say?" And he said, "It says, go fuck yourself." And that's essentially what it said. They were like, "Who the fuck do you think you are? We're not answering these questions." And then that was the end of it. So I went to Kerry And Kerry said, I think we should probably just kill this investigation. And I thought, yeah, of course we should, because all you want is to be Secretary of State. You don't give a shit about the truth.
Kiriakou reflects on the consequences of lost credibility and the dangers of ignoring global realities. He warns that America's failure to adapt could leave it sidelined in the New World Order, urging viewers to stay vigilant and demand accountability from leaders at home and abroad. His final thoughts are both a warning and a call to action, reminding us that the choices made today will echo for generations.